On the first morning of sniper school, the room was loud with voices and laughter. Trainees stood tall in their new uniforms, polished boots shining, and expensive tactical gear strapped tight to their bodies. But in the middle of that room stood Olivia Monroe, quiet, plain, and wearing only an old faded sweatshirt with worn-out boots that looked like they had survived many winters. An officer with a hard voice slammed a folder on the table, the sharp sound echoing through the training hall. Every head turned as he barked her name. "Private Monroe, Reserves blank history," he sneered. "Best you withdraw from sniper school, now before you waste our time." The words cut through the room like a blade, and the whole hall erupted in cruel laughter. One trainee leaned close to his buddy, smirking as he said loudly enough for all to hear, "Nobody like her has ever graduated here, not in 1,000 years. Don't get your hopes up, sweetheart." Another shouted, "Rifles are longer than her arms. How will she ever hit a target?" The voices rolled together like a cruel chorus, echoing through the steel walls, and Olivia felt every eye burn into hers. She said nothing, not a single word. Instead, she picked up her rifle, a self-tuned SR-25, its black frame plain and without shine, and walked slowly toward the range, her step steady, her back straight, her silence louder than the laughter that followed her. Outside, the Colorado wind howled through the pines, carrying the sharp smell of gun oil and damp earth. The ground was soft with mud that pulled at her boots, the sky gray with heavy clouds, and the air biting cold. Olivia stood at the edge of the range, her hair loose and whipping across her face, her hands steady as she laid her rifle down on the shooting table. The other trainees kept their distance, whispering and smirking, their brand new gear glinting under the pale light. She looked like she had wandered in from a thrift store, while they looked like models in a glossy military Ada. Tall trainee with a brand new watch muttered to his friend, "She looks like she came from a homeless shelter, not a sniper school." The words carried on the wind. Others chuckled and elbowed each other, waiting for her to flinch, waiting for her to break. But Olivia did not even blink. Her fingers moved smoothly over the rifle, wiping down the barrel with practiced precision. Every motion calm and deliberate, like she had done it 1,000 times before. The officer who had called her out earlier walked past, his boots crunching in the dirt. He stopped for a moment, looked her over from head to toe, then shook his head with open disgust. "You are in over your head, kid," he said loud enough for all to hear, his tone full of final judgment. Olivia's eyes flicked up for half a second, her gaze sharp and unshaken. Then she looked back down at her rifle. Not a word passed her lips, only that look, cold, calm, and filled with something the officer could not name. It was enough to make him pause before he turned away. The laughter of the others returned, but it felt thinner now, like their confidence was not quite as strong. Olivia kept working, cloth sliding through the barrel, hands moving with silent rhythm. She finished her cleaning and stood in the cold, the mud clinging to her boots, her breath steady in the sharp wind. That same afternoon, an instructor with years carved into the lines of his face walked over to check the rifles. His eyes narrow, his steps slow. He reached for Olivia's SR-25, expecting to find mistakes, expecting to confirm the rumors that she was nothing. He lifted the barrel toward the light, then froze, his face tightening. His breath caught for a moment, and his hands stopped moving. On the barrel were faint engravings, tiny and almost invisible, but clear to an expert. Kill confirmation codes from missions that were never spoken about in classrooms. Codes only connected to operations whispered in the highest ranks. The instructor stared, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Where did you get this? Who taught you this?" The room went silent. The other trainees stopped laughing, their smirks fading as they leaned closer to see what had stolen the color from the instructor's face. Whispers rippled through the group. What does it mean? What did he see? Why is he staring at her rifle like that? Nobody had answers. Nobody dared to ask. Olivia just stood there, her eyes steady, her face calm, her silence as unshakable as stone. The instructor lowered the rifle slowly, his hands unsteady for the first time. and said nothing more. He turned and walked away, leaving a heavy silence in the air. The laughter was gone, replaced by an uneasiness that clung to every corner of the range. The others glanced at each other, unsure, unsettled. No longer certain of their own judgment, Olivia stood alone at the edge of the field. The storm clouds heavy above her, the smell of oil and wet earth surrounding her. She adjusted the strap on her rifle, her movements unhurried, her breath steady, her face unreadable. Nobody laughed now, nobody spoke. Only the sound of the wind through the trees, and the quiet scrape of her boots in the mud. As she walked forward into the gray afternoon, leaving behind a silence that felt louder than any insult they had thrown that morning. The next morning began with the sharp sound of boots striking the concrete floor, the training hall filled with the smell of oil and metal, rifles laid out on long tables shining under the buzzing lights. Voices echoed as trainees bragged about their gear. Some laughed at each other, some whispered about Olivia. But when she entered the room, everything grew quiet for just a second. Then the noise returned like thunder, louder than before. Mocking and cruel, Olivia walked slowly, carrying her SR-25 wrapped carefully in an old cloth. She placed it down with care, her face calm, her body steady, while others slammed their rifles on the tables with pride. She sat and began to take the rifle apart, piece by piece, each screw and pin laid out with precision, her fingers moving with ease like she had done this 1,000 times in silence. One trainee leaned on the table nearby, his smirk wide, his voice sharp as he said, "Check out her sweatshirt. Looks like it came from her mom's laundry basket." His friend burst out laughing. Another voice called, "Rifles are not made for you, sweetheart. That thing will knock you flat before you even pull the trigger." The group laughed, their eyes on her, waiting for her to break. But Olivia's hands never shook, her eyes never lifted. She kept working with the same quiet rhythm, sliding a brush through the barrel, slow and deliberate, her silence stronger than their words. At last she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I rebuilt it from a broken one." The words floated across the room like a whisper. The hall exploded with laughter. "A gunsmith now," someone shouted. The echo bounced off the steel walls. Another yelled, "Who even let you touch that thing?" Their voices rough with arrogance, their laughter heavy. But Olivia's eyes stayed down, her fingers steady, her breathing slow like a calm river in the middle of a storm. An officer walked past, his scowl deep, his eyes filled with doubt. He stopped at her table, leaned down, and scoffed, "Who let you even hold this weapon?" His words carried across the hall. Olivia's hands paused for the briefest second, then moved again, wiping each part with gentle care. She did not answer, she did not explain. The silence she carried was louder than their laughter, heavier than their insults. Later that day, the door opened with a creak, and the head sniper instructor stepped inside. Callahan, a grizzled man with scars running across his knuckles, his gaze sharp as broken glass. He walked slowly through the hall, his boots echoing with each step. The room fell quiet as he passed, his eyes scanning the rifles, his presence pulling the air tight. He stopped suddenly at Olivia's station, his gaze fixed on her SR-25. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing at the custom threading on the barrel. His hand touched the metal with care, his voice low like he was speaking to himself. "This is a Unit 9 configuration." His tone carried weight. Only a handful in the world knew what that meant. He lifted his head and looked at her. "Who taught you this?" His question cut through the silence like a blade. Every trainee froze, waiting for her answer. Olivia lifted her eyes for the first time, steady and calm, her voice soft. "I used to fix their rifles. Sometimes they let me shoot." The hall filled with a heavy silence, the laughter gone, the smirks fading, her words simple, but they struck like thunder in the ears of those who understood. Callahan's jaw tightened, his scarred hand flexing as if remembering battles long past. Another officer leaned over, whispering to him, "She talks like a gunsmith from a forward combat zone." Nobody laughed this time. No smirks, no cruel comments, only silence and shifting eyes. Trainees who once mocked her now looked uneasy, their arrogance shaken, their doubt turning to something they could not yet admit. Olivia lowered her gaze again, her hands moving across the rifle with silent mastery, her fingers sliding along the steel like it was an old friend. Callahan stood there a moment longer, his face unreadable, then he turned and walked away without a word, the sound of his boots fading into the distance. The air in the hall felt different after that, heavier, charged, like the walls themselves had heard something important. The trainees glanced at each other, whispers low, their laughter gone, their eyes no longer shining with the same pride that evening. The silence followed Olivia into the mess hall. Trays clattered, voices filled the room, but there was an uneasiness in the air. Some stared at her sweatshirt, at her plain boots, but none laughed now. Some whispered instead, their voices unsure, like they were no longer certain of who she was or what she carried in her silence. Olivia sat alone, her tray holding only an apple, her eyes lowered, her body still, her silence wrapping around her like armor back in the barracks. While others bragged and laughed loudly, Olivia sat on her bunk, her hands moving slowly as she checked the rifle again. Her eyes calm, her face unreadable. The memory of Callahan's words still hung in the air, his question echoing in the silence. "Who taught you this?" Olivia whispered nothing in reply. Her silence gave no answer, and that silence was more frightening than anything she could have said. The next morning, when the trainees gathered again, their voices carried less arrogance. Their eyes carried more doubt. They had seen her quiet skill. They had heard her simple words. And they had felt the silence that followed her. Olivia Monroe, the one told to leave sniper school, was no longer just the outcast in a sweatshirt. She was becoming something else. Something none of them could yet name, but none of them would ever forget. The night was cold in the Colorado mountains, the wind sharp against the skin, the trees whispering under the weight of snow, the ground uneven and wet with mud. The trainees moved in a line through the darkness, their rifles heavy in their arms, their eyes scanning with infrared scopes that painted shadows into shapes. Every step was a test, every sound a risk. The drill was meant to break the weak and sharpen the strong. Olivia was at the back of the line, her steps slow and steady, her breath even, her rifle held close like it was part of her body. She did not rush, she did not stumble, she moved with care, each foot placed like she had walked mountains before. Her silence stretched out behind her like a shield. The other trainees glanced back, whispering, wondering why she lagged so far behind, wondering if she was afraid. Derek, the loud trainee with a chip on his shoulder, slowed his pace until he was beside her, his voice mocking in the cold air. "Female reflexes are slow. Maybe you should try paintball instead." His words cut through the night. A few others laughed under their breath, their foggy breaths mixing with the bitter wind. Olivia did not answer. She did not even look at him. She only tightened her grip on her rifle, her eyes fixed on the ridgeline ahead. An instructor walking nearby joined in, his beard thick and his voice booming. "At that pace your target would be gone before you even raised the scope." More chuckles followed, but Olivia stayed quiet, her notebook tucked under her arm, her pencil scratching faintly as she scribbled quick notes even while walking. The cold bit into her fingers, but she kept writing, her silence stronger than their mockery, her calm heavier than their words. The group moved deeper into the forest, the night closing in, the cold pressing harder, the shadows playing tricks on their eyes. Halfway through the drill, Olivia stopped, her body lowering to the ground, her hand raising in a sharp signal. The others stumbled, confused, some rolling their eyes. Derek scoffed loudly. "What now? She's lost already." But Olivia's eyes were on the mud, her hand pointing to a faint print barely visible in the weak light. A boot print, fresh and not their own. Her voice was low but clear. "We are not alone." The team froze, their laughter gone, their confidence shaken. They scanned the trees in silence, their bravado swallowed by the thought of another presence in the dark. Olivia's hands moved in precise signals, spreading them out, steadying them, her eyes sharp as she studied the ridges. Every movement calm, every breath even. When the drill ended and the truth was revealed, only Olivia had spotted the decoy planted to test their awareness. Derek's face burned with shame as the team looked at her in silence. The next day the sun rose bright, but the wind carried dust across the range. The trainees gathered with rifles in hand. The targets lined up in the distance, the air filled with tension and unspoken challenges. Derek swaggered over to Olivia, his grin wide and false, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "If you are that good, hit the 500-meter target in this crosswind. Let's make a bet. If you miss, you quit the program." His words echoed across the range. The other trainees gathered, laughter sharp and eager like they were watching a play. Olivia said nothing, her face calm, her hands moving with precision as she adjusted her scope, her shooting pillow, her body lowering into position. The wind was strong, a sharp 30-degree side gust that made the target sway like a leaf. Josh, the nervous trainee, shouted with glee, "No ballistic computer, you will miss by a mile." His laugh joined by others, but Olivia's eyes narrowed slightly, her breath steady, her silence wrapping around her like armor. She pulled the trigger, the crack echoing across the range. The target swayed and then stilled, the glass shattering with a perfect hole dead center. Silence fell heavy over the range. The laughter died in throats. Mouths hung open, eyes wide. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. Only the sound of wind carried across the dirt field. Olivia stood slowly, flicked her rifle to safety, removed her headset, and bowed her head slightly as if it were nothing more than practice. The ballistics instructor, Carter, lanky and sharp-eyed, ran to the target, his face pale when he returned. Wind angle, humidity, target movement. She calculated it all in her head. He muttered in disbelief. Derek's rifle slipped from his hands and clattered to the dirt. His grin gone, his pride broken. The others stared in silence, their arrogance crumbling into awe. Olivia turned and walked off the range, her boots crunching in the dust, her figure calm and steady. Carter's words trailing after her like a whisper. "That is not training. That is instinct." That evening the campfire burned weak against the cold. The trainees huddled close, their voices low, their laughter absent. Whispers spread like smoke. Some said she cheated. Others said she must have been planted by command. Some feared she was more than she appeared. Olivia sat apart, her scope in her lap, her fingers adjusting it with slow precision, her eyes reflecting the firelight. She spoke no words, her silence louder than the whispers around her, her presence heavier than the night itself. The camp had shifted, the air changed. Olivia Monroe, once mocked and dismissed, was no longer a target of laughter. She was a mystery, a storm waiting on the horizon, and everyone in that camp knew they had seen something they would never forget. The morning began with tension in the air, the sky heavy with gray clouds, the mess hall buzzing with voices that carried unease instead of laughter. Trainees spoke in low whispers, their eyes shifting toward Olivia as she sat alone, her tray bare except for a single apple. She ate in silence, every bite slow, every movement calm. And though her sweatshirt was still stained and her boots still old, nobody laughed anymore. Their curiosity had grown sharper than their mockery later in the day, the armory filled with the smell of oil and iron, rifles laid out across the lawn, steel tables. Officers moved through the room with sharp eyes. One of them, Lieutenant Hayes, with a harsh voice and a buzzcut, stopped at Olivia's table. His gaze fixed on the numbers etched faintly into the wooden stock of her rifle. His boots struck the concrete hard as he marched forward, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Marking training weapons is strictly prohibited. This school does not allow fantasy kill counts." His words lashed out like a whip. A skinny trainee named Josh chuckled nervously, his voice cracking as he called out, "She thinks she's John Wick." Laughter broke out, but it was uneasy, strained, as if none of them truly believed it. Olivia kept her head down, wiping the numbers gently with a cloth. Her movements slow and almost reverent. Another trainee whispered under his breath, "If it is fake, why does she look like she's about to faint?" The room fell into a heavier silence, their laughter dying quickly, their eyes drawn to her steady hands and blank expression. The door to the armory swung open with a creak, the sound pulling every head toward it. A man entered with gray hair and eyes like steel, General Whitaker. His presence carried weight like the air itself bent around him. He walked with slow, measured steps, his eyes sharp and searching. When they landed on Olivia's rifle, he froze, his face tightening, his voice dropping to a whisper, almost too quiet to hear. "It cannot be. Those numbers, only one person knew them." The trainees stared wide-eyed, confusion spreading like fire. Whitaker turned sharply to the officers, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "Cancel the rest of training, cancel it now." The officers froze, their clipboards clutched tight, nobody moved. Olivia wiped her hands on a rag, her face calm, her breathing even. Her file still lay on the table beside her, thin and nearly empty, only her name written across the top. Nothing else. Later that night, Olivia was called into the command office. The room small and cold, the walls bare, a metal desk standing at the center. Colonel Vance sat behind it, his voice gravelly, his eyes hard. He flipped through her file with frustration. Page after page blank, no background, no record, no unit, no history, just a placeholder name. "We do not keep ghosts here," he said. "Turn in your weapon and leave." Before sunrise, his words final and sharp. Olivia stood tall, her hands clasped behind her back, her face unreadable. She did not argue. She did not plead. She only gave a single nod, sharp and precise. She turned to leave, her boots echoing on the floor, the creak of the door filling the silence like a slow drumbeat. But before she could step out, the door swung open wider. General Whitaker entered, his face set like stone, his hands carrying a small black folder. He laid the folder on the desk with deliberate care, opening it to reveal a classified badge. The name Olivia Monroe written across it, below the name a designation clear and chilling, Ghost Tier 0, Whitaker's voice carried through the room, sharp as thunder. "She is the sole survivor of Operation Blood Nest." His words froze the air. Vance's face drained of color, his hands shaking as he stared at the badge, his authority crumbling in the weight of what it meant. Olivia stood still, her eyes steady, her silence unbroken. Whitaker turned toward her, his voice quieter now, but heavy with respect. He lifted his hand in the elite sniper salute, a slow, deliberate gesture, one reserved for the highest of the high, the rarest of the rare. The room was dead silent. Vance stared helplessly, unable to speak. Olivia returned the salute, her eyes sharp, her body steady, her silence carrying more power than any words could hold. Outside the office, the camp buzzed with rumor, whispers flying through the night air. Trainees gathered in clusters, their faces pale, their voices hushed. Nobody laughed, nobody joked. Respect and fear blended together as they looked toward the barracks where Olivia walked alone, her bag over her shoulder, her boots steady on the gravel, her rifle slung across her back like a shadow she never put down. The path cleared before her as trainees stepped aside, their mockery gone, their arrogance silenced. Derek stood at the edge of the group, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. But he did not speak. Josh clutched his rifle close, his knuckles white. Sam, the quiet one, touched the pocket where he kept his old photo of soldiers in desert camo, his eyes following her with questions he did not dare to ask. Olivia walked past them all, her head high, her silence strong, the wind tugging at her hair, the storm inside her unseen. That night the barracks were quiet, laughter absent, voices low, whispers of Ghost Tier 0 spreading through the walls like smoke. Olivia sat on her bunk, her rifle laid across her knees, her hands moving slowly as she checked every part, her face calm, her eyes distant, the weight of her past and the truth of her present hanging heavy in the silence around her. The ghost had been revealed, and nothing at the camp would ever be the same again.